NATO leaders in Brussels have made new pledges to provide Ukraine with weapons and military training. There's been no immediate promise of more tanks and no advance on increasing overall defense spending. Allies have agreed to supply more ammunition and artillery shells, but NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg admits more needs to be done.
It's a show of support. NATO allies have decided to ramp up their weapons production for Ukraine, as concerns rise that Ukraine is using ammunition much faster than the West is producing it.
Things are happening, but we need to continue. We need to step up even more because there is a big need out there to provide Ukraine with ammunition. This is now becoming a grinding war of attrition, and a war of attrition is a war of logistics, and therefore this is so crucial for our ability to ensure that Ukraine wins, is able to retake territory.
U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is optimistic that with targeted support, there is real chance Ukraine could make significant gains in the war.
For every system that we provide, we're going to train troops on that system, but we're also going to give them additional training on maneuver, on the integration of fires, on sustainment, and on maintenance. And so with that additional capability, better trained troops, platforms that can perform a lot better in this environment, I think they'll have a real good chance at making a pretty significant difference on the battlefield.
Considering future security threats, the Secretary General urged member countries to spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense. But no agreement was reached on new targets for overall defense spending by the NATO allies.
DW correspondent Terry Schultz in Brussels has been following the talks, and I asked her earlier what exactly NATO is promising in order to speed up military aid for Ukraine.
There are a lot of different things that NATO needs to do to speed up the delivery of what it's already promised to Ukraine. And that's what Secretary General Stoltenberg was talking about, although they have known for many months now that Ukraine was firing many more rounds of artillery bullets than could be produced. They have yet to really ramp up production on the ground here in Europe or even in the United States to meet that demand. So now they're getting really serious about it. It's a shortfall that people worry could see Ukraine actually running out of ammunition. And so each country is looking at what it can do to both generate more production in their own companies and also join together. They're talking about jointly procuring ammunition now to make the orders big enough to entice industry to change production practices and make them more rapid.
Now, one of the big challenges for NATO countries seems to be supplying Ukraine with military equipment while maintaining their own ability to defend themselves. How is the alliance handling this issue?
This is an issue because, of course, nobody was prepared for a shooting war in Europe again. So once this started, they had to send a lot of these weapons that they hadn't really been stocking up on in over past years. In fact, with ammunition, which we scaling production, thinking it wouldn't be necessary again. So when it came to supplying Ukraine, Secretary General Stoltenberg said, don't think about this as a dilemma. If you've got an issue, send the supplies to Ukraine and let's backfill our own stocks later. So he's allowed countries to sort of reduce the standards and what they should keep on hand for some kind of domestic emergency. And they're planning on replenishing those as we talk about scaling up the ammunition supplies.
And the allies are also discussing potential changes to national defense budgets among all of this, right?
That's true. I mean, all these things we're talking about cost a lot of money, more than NATO was prepared for when it made this 2% pledge 7 years ago. That's, of course, one that's become famous in Germany because Germany was very slow to scale up its defense spending and has come under a lot of criticism for it. But it's certainly not the only country. So now what NATO is talking about is not making 2% the lower the upper threshold, but rather the lower threshold. Some countries are already already spending 3% of their GDP on their defense, and they'd like to see other countries ramp up as well. So by 2024, NATO is going to need to come up with a new formula to replace the so-called Wales Pledge, and that's something that they plan to decide at this summer's summit in Vilnius.
What about Ukraine's plea for fighter jets? Any progress on that issue?
If you're Ukraine, you certainly don't see any progress. This is not something NATO has any appetite to do. None of the allies who possess these fighter jets have made any offer whatsoever to Ukraine, and they don't see this as really a practical solution for Ukraine. They believe that fighter jets flying over Russian-held territory in Ukraine would immediately be shot down, and so that's a very expensive failure. What NATO has said today and yesterday to Ukraine is that let us bolster your air defense so that you can shoot down these missiles without having fighter jets in the air. This is something they're talking about possibly providing Ukraine in the future when Ukraine has pushed Russia off its territory to rebuild an air defense, including fighter jets for Ukraine. But everyone says it's too early now. This is really not something that's in the cards at the moment. But remember, that was said about tanks as well, and now they should be on their way to Ukraine. So you never know.
DW correspondent Terry Schultz in Brussels. Thank you so much. NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg has admitted that Turkey has so far blocked Sweden and Finland from joining the alliance. He's planning a trip to Ankara for talks on the issue. The Swedish Defense Minister Paul Jonsson told DW Brussels bureau chief Alexandra von Namm that Sweden and Finland are coordinating their NATO membership bids.
Sweden and Finland started this process together, and we've been going together the whole process. Our preferred option will be that Sweden and Finland would join at the same time. At the same time, I have respect for the fact that these are two national sovereign parliaments, both in Budapest and Ankara, who have to decide how they deal and interact with our applications. I can take note of the fact that 28 out of 30 allies has already ratified our application in a record speed, and now we're waiting for, of course, from Ankara and from Budapest.
And are you confident that Ankara and Budapest will drop their resistance to your NATO application?
As far as Budapest goes, we have not heard any criticism insofar for our application. It's been more processes that has been a hinder for the parliament in Budapest. In regards to Turkey, we have an MOU between Sweden, Finland and Turkey, and we are very much focusing on implementing that agreement. And when that is fulfilled, we of course hope that we will have a rapid ratification. Let me also say right now, I think when it comes to Turkey, all focus right now is of course of alleviating the human suffering and the tragedy that's going on there.
NATO allies here in Brussels have pledged to increase their military assistance for Ukraine. Sweden is not a member of the alliance yet, but still you are ready also to increase your military help for Ukraine, as I understand. So what will be your contribution?
Well, when the new Swedish government entered power in October, we were crystal clear that we're going to escalate support for Ukraine. That's absolutely crucial because Putin escalated the war, and the only way to respond is by increasing support. Therefore, we have sent winter equipment, various forms of air defense systems. The latest batch on our 10th support package, that was on the combat vehicle 90, which we provided over 50 CV-90s, and which we can actually build a battalion in conjunction with the Ukrainians, and that's going to provide the Ukrainians with more combat power. Supporting Ukraine is about helping Ukraine, but it's also about investing into our own security, and it's absolutely critical for our security interests that Ukraine regains its territorial integrity, its freedom and independence, and we are with them all the way to assure that.
Germany has promised Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine, but they are scrambling to get enough partners on board to deliver those tanks. Sweden has those tanks. Are you willing to deploy them to Ukraine?
Yeah, we had a very constructive meeting with Boris Pistorius earlier today, and we called something called the Panzer lunch, and it was also with the Polish defense minister. I think it was very, very helpful. What we're focusing right now is on delivering the combat vehicle 90 and training that battalion, but I said we're also open to participate in the Leopard group, and we could provide training, transportation, logistics, spare parts, or even tanks. So this is being done in deliberations now with the other members of the tank family. What I think is very important is to remember supporting Ukraine now is not about sending platforms, it's about building capabilities, and you can do that with artillery systems. So Sweden is also working on sending the Archer system, which is a very advanced howitzer, and we're also sending the CV-90s, and we possibly also could sending tanks, but we have to think about the economies of scales and efficiency. What's the best way to build these kind of capabilities that the Ukrainians need?
Thank you very much.